Have you fallen into an open manhole recently? Do you find yourself in the company of strangers? Well, then you might very well be in the feature Underground. Here lies Hunter Lanier once again with a review of an upcoming movie. This time it is The Death of Robin Hood, written and directed by Michael Sarnoski, who you may remember as the director of Pig, the Nicolas Cage film from a few years ago, as well as the director of the most recent A Quiet Place movie. Notably, he is also currently attached to write and direct the upcoming Death Stranding film. Believe it or not, The Death of Robin Hood is a revisionist Western. Not, of course, Western in the American sense, but in the global sense. It strips out all of the romanticism of English folklore and fully embraces the miserable existence of the Middle Ages. Monday, it's dysentery. Wednesday, you've contracted leprosy. And on the weekend, you watch your family get maimed by bandits. Such was life in the good old days. And this version of Robin Hood is very much a reflection of those times. Again, to use the revisionist Western trope, he is an aged gunslinger with decades of violence behind him that have taken the shine from his golden years. His past has not only made him the target of young gunslingers or arrow slingers who are looking to make a name for themselves by taking out the famous Robin Hood, but also a target of young men and women who are descendants of those that have fallen in his path. And this wretched existence of Robin Hood's, it's not simply alluded to. We see it in the first 20 or so minutes of the movie, which are, that first 20 minutes, it's very bleak and very violent. More so than I was expecting. And where we find this Robin Hood, he is just slowly being crushed by the burden of so many decades of lies and violence, to the point where the only thing he now desires is what he calls a good death. But in Karma's last hurrah, that good death always seems to just barely elude him. Eventually, he finds himself on this island of lost toys, a kind of medieval rehab center for the damned, where he just might find a sliver of redemption. Okay, that's the loose plot. What about the movie itself? Is it good? Well, this is the type of movie that I normally would not like. It takes that lo-fi indie approach that overvalues gloominess and brooding as a substitute for drama. There's sort of an uglyification thing happening with the movie where it's trying, you get the feeling that it's trying a little too hard to be distressed and drab, like the cinematic equivalent of buying jeans with holes already in them. But as the film went on, I found it more and more convincing. It fits snugly in that revisionist Western archetype of the aged gunslinger haunted by his past, and it doesn't necessarily break new ground there either. But as I said, it slowly, through its performances and through some subtle character choices, ends up being a convincing retelling of that story. As for those character nuances and those subtle character choices that I think push this movie over, one of which is that this version of Robin Hood, he isn't a man who's so passionate about his ideals that passion results in extreme behavior. In other words, he's not someone who has reluctantly committed violence and lied in support of his ideals and now in his old age feels bad about it. He is instead an inherently violent man, and an inherently a man who is much more inclined to the life of an outlaw than the life of a hero. He's a man who took what he wanted from the people who had most of it and then retroactively applied meaning to those actions in the stories he told others. And I think that's true of most violent revolutionaries. They are not people who are driven to extremes as a result of their passions or their ideals. They are people who are driven to extremes first and then dress those impulses in the most socially acceptable reasons. Now, one of the many half-true things they teach you in grade school English class is that fiction, or I guess any kind of story, can be broken down into man versus self, man versus nature, and man versus man. Now, the death of Robin Hood, within that dynamic, would fall under man versus self. But it's not himself. It's man versus the man that Robin Hood has created. He is now, at the end of his life, locked in this mortal struggle with this false version of himself that he himself created, so that he wouldn't run headlong into hell on his own. And that, in particular, is why he seems to be more haunted by the lies than he is by the violence. And going off of that, there's this great touch in the movie where he doesn't even remember the people that he has killed. So he doesn't feel remorse for specific actions. He refers to his casualties at one point in the movie as shadows. It creates another sad layer to this character because as an old man, you know, you're expected to have this cornucopia of memories, good and bad. And here he is as an old man, with fewer memories than ever before. It's as if every time he killed someone, he lost something of himself in that person. You know, he's not damned to a life of pain or torture. He's damned to a life of just being a non-entity. And that brings me to this motif in the movie of bloodletting. Just as we know now that simply draining someone's bad blood isn't enough to heal them, the same could be said in the film about the Robin Hood character as a whole. Can't simply separate a man from the things that he did and thereby fundamentally change him. It's not that easy. And I speak of all these ideas and the characterization stuff just to say that this film, as much as it may seem like it in the first 20 minutes, it is not merely a 2-hour endurance test of 13th century realism that you spend with a character who is miserable and hates himself. Because during the first 20 minutes, I was worried, is this movie just going to be a bummer? Is this movie not going to have a lot of thematic weight? Is it just going to want to make me feel bad the whole time in this kind of monotone way? And gratefully, the movie shifts gears at some point and starts actually telling a story. The film, like Robin Hood himself, starts to slowly and retroactively make sense of its own suffering instead of just wallowing in the suffering. And I'm not the biggest fan of Hugh Jackman, but I have to say, I think his casting here is actually kind of an inspired choice. Not only does he make you feel like his character is incredibly remorseful of his past, of his violent past, but at the same time still very much capable of it. What makes it an inspired choice is that you can very much envision Hugh Jackman as the Errol Flynn Robin Hood. You can see him smiling ear to ear, swinging through the trees in the forest, maybe even singing a little bit to some woodland critters. It's very easy to see Hugh Jackman as a swashbuckling Technicolor hero. He seems as much made for that role as he is for this one. And it gives this version of Robin Hood, it gives his misery and his emotional state, what happens is that you project that contrast onto the character, and it makes it more impactful. And you do all of this without the movie asking you to, just because of the casting. Or at least I did that. Oh, and in my last review I did of The Furious, which I very much liked, I did bring up that movie's flat digital look, and I talked a little bit, I went on a tangent about Netflix movies. The Death of Robin Hood is very much the opposite of all of that. It is drenched in shadows and has a ton of visual depth. However, to accompany the film's, the misery of the main character and the world you're in, you will not find the verdant greens of the Sherwood Forest in this film. The color palette is it's blacks, grays, and piss yellows. The sun rays in this movie look like streams of urine. This is a visually bleak movie. And yet, Sarnoski does a great job of every once in a while sprinkling in these little footholds of beauty so that you can see where the poets clung to create this romanticized past. For example, there's this beautiful cliffside castle that every once in a while you get a nice, postcard shot of. Now, before I leave, I do want to touch briefly on Sarnoski's upcoming Death Stranding film, because I am a fan of those games, and I'm very curious to see what Sarnoski is going to do with them. Where I'm confused and why I want to talk about it is that the style that is apparent in Pig and The Death of Robin Hood, I don't see that style as being tonally akin to the style of Death Stranding. His storytelling sensibilities don't seem to generally align with Hideo Kojima's. One of them is muted and drab, the other one is talky and ostentatious. It would be like Tarkovsky adapting a Thomas Pynchon book, or cooking a hamburger in the oven. There is some all-important sizzle being lost. Well, those are all my thoughts on The Death of Robin Hood. Now is the time, as always, for you to let me know your thoughts on my thoughts. Next up, I'm not quite sure what I'll be reviewing. We're in the summer movie season. I'm sure something will come up. Until that day, I leave you with the always comforting reminder that every day underground is a good day.